Top of the Props is brought to you by Barkingham Palace Dog Grooming at Lemire, 1/10 Holiday Road, Lemire, where every pups are king or queen. Find them on Facebook, Barkingham Palace Dog Grooming, Macarthur. If you'd like to sponsor Top of the Props, contact us, the 81st minute at outlook.com. So it's now time for Top of the Props, and it's episode 2, and we've got another former Australian Kangaroos front rower. He also represented New South Wales and won a premiership with his beloved Manly Sea Eagles back in 1987. It's Phil Daley. G'day, mate. How are you?
Good. Hey, Curtis. Good, thanks, mate. Great to talk to you.
So, and as we were just saying off air too, you're following the fine footsteps of Shane Webke, mate. But your story, as all the stories are going to be, in obviously everyone's got a different yarn to tell, and yours over, I guess between when you first got your first start at Manly, you run inside in '85. Through to, I guess, that back end of '88. It's a story, all right, and we'll get to that in a little bit more. But I do want to start, and you probably get asked about this more than anything else, Phil, and it's Game 2, 1988 at Lang Park, and the Blues are actually up, and I believe the Blues are up 6-4 at this stage, with about 20 minutes to play. Now, I remember you telling me last year, for an article on the 81stminute.com, from memory, you said something like, and I didn't put this in the article, but you said something like, oh yeah, Greg Kineski mustn't have liked something I did in the tackle, and the next thing it's on. Well, about 5 minutes ago, Phil, I looked on YouTube and I had a little Bo Peep, and you landed about 20 of the best short ones I've ever seen on Kineski was on his back. Do you remember that?
Mate, it might have been an old turtle, mate. It were good times, mate, in those days. But as you say, it was pretty amazing. And it was the old Lang Park too, which is the old wooden stand, and the people were right on top of you in those days. And mate, they certainly didn't like New South, which they don't now. But even I think they hated us more in those days, mate. That's for sure.
And because obviously on that YouTube, and if you're listening out there, just jump on YouTube and search Game 2 State of Origin 88, and you'll see it there. So the camera pans away to the crowd, and I think it cuts back, and you're on top of the turtle. Can you remember what happened before that, leading it up to that point?
Well, I think, mate, if I recall, I think they made half break and they were making their way up the field, mate. And I think I wanted to slow the game down a little bit, so I've friggin' got hold of Turtle and give him a couple, and then the next thing you know, in comes the king, and I don't know, the king, I don't think he must have liked me, the king. He come running in from nowhere, and then it was really on then. So I tried to get hold of the king and give him a couple of good ones, but he was pretty hard to land a few on the king. Otherwise, I would have got him too.
Now, this follows a couple of years after the infamous Les Boyd, Darryl Broman story, where Les Boyd was kind of given the tip. He said, go out there and hurt as many Queenslanders as you can, and that ended up costing Darryl Broman his Australian jersey. But and then a few years after that, you got Mark Geyer. He kind of got the same tip from officials at New South Wales Rugby League. Were you told anything before you debuted, leading into any of these games, you've got a specific job in the team, or was it just get out there and
mate,
play your game?
Just rip in, mate. No,
Yeah.
There was nothing like premeditated to take anyone out. But in those days, mate, probably doesn't change that much. The old front rower, mate, his job's there to take the ball up, make the yards, and hurt a few, try to crunch blokes in the tackles and just block the middle, and no specific sort of, specific instructions. But, the game hasn't changed in some ways, that if the forwards don't go forward, mate, well, the backs can't do their work. So, the forwards still got a plenty important game as they did then to make the yards and pave the way, I think.
And as I just mentioned, I was looking at that YouTube video, and it actually shows you running off the field, because you and Kinescu, I think back in those days, both the blokes would get sin bit at the same time, and they'd kind of jog off together, right?
Yeah, that's
so
true
I actually saw, so on the footage there, you actually run past him and give him a little bump in the tunnel as well. Was there anything exchanged in the tunnel, or you guys were just too knackered to continue on?
Well, mate, I didn't, mate. I might have been a little bit naughty then, mate. I thought I might have tried to get another one in on him, and hopefully might have gone on a little more. But yes, I did drop a shoulder into him. I admit that. So back in those days, so you're both off at the same time, which was quite interesting, wasn't it?
Absolutely, and you would have been in the shed. So another interesting part about all this is that for the next minute or so, it rains down hundreds and hundreds, and many of these cans are still full. Hundreds of 4X cans onto the field. You've got journalists or cameramen on the sideline. They're ducking and diving. You've got Queensland ball boys trying to throw the cans back into the crowd. You've got coppers running from the other side of the field. And did you miss the whole thing? Were you in the sheds?
Yeah, mate, I didn't actually see all that, no, till after the game. But, mate, it's a bloody interesting story, isn't it? Do you think that after that, that's what people say to me now. They say, well, you go to Lang Park or Suncorp Stadium, and I've made all these packaging companies millions of dollars, Curtis. Because after that, they banned canned beer and they went to plastic cups, and then they only sell light beer. So, mate, I've done it myself as well.
Now, in the following years, and I don't want to jump around too much, but a quick question which has just popped into my head. So you went and played for the Seagulls in the early 90s, and then you live up in Queensland now. When was the first time post-career that you went back to Lang Park as a spectator? Have you done that?
Yeah. Well, I have. Yeah, I have. I did go back. Obviously, I've seen a couple of rugby league games, but I probably went back up there more often in the 2000s when my son Ben was playing for the Queensland Reds in the rugby union, mate. Yep. They were playing up there, and they won the premiership in 2011. So, mate, some good times up there then for sure.
And you mentioned the King. Now he got 5 in the bin. I'm not sure what he did, but and I'm a staunch New South Welshman, but on that footage, like clearly, to me, I don't know what he did to get 5 in the bin, but he goes off the field, and then he comes back, and then Queensland click into gear. Were you worried post-match? Was there any comments made, or was anything said to you after the game? Because you obviously got picked for Game 3, and that's another story we'll get to very, very soon. Was there anything said after the game, or was it just business as usual?
Nah, just business as usual, you know. But gee whiz, at the end of the day, Wally Lewis in that period of time, mate, he was the best in the game. He really was, and obviously that's why they did call him the King. But he was the King of Lang Park, and give him credit. Wally was a bigger guy than everyone kind of thought. He was a pretty solid guy, and he could turn the game. And when he was on, he could turn a game, which he did that night too.
What were your memories of John Peard as a State of Origin coach for the Blues?
Yeah, it's hard. I didn't have a lot to do with Johnny Peard as a coach, to be perfectly honest. Like in terms of just in and out of the teams, But I had a comparison. Bob Fulton was my coach at Manly at the time through my career, and he was a fantastic coach, Bob Fulton, and to compare it, no one really compared to him in my opinion as a coach and as a mentor. Bozo was fantastic, so he was the best in my opinion. Bozo.
All right, so we'll get to Game 3 in a second, or what happens before that for those that don't know. We'll get to that in a second, but it's funny you mentioned Wally, and you said, I don't know if the King likes me too much, and you actually said that, and I quoted you in that article last year saying exact same thing. Now, you ended up at the Gold Coast Seagulls in 1991, and all of a sudden, at the end of 90, early 91, Wally Lewis, helicopter and all, he shows up at the Seagulls. So what was your relationship like with Wally through that time, through 91?
Yeah, it was an interesting time there at the Seagulls and that. But I think I ended up playing reserve grade that year. To be honest, Curtis, we had a pretty good. So we made Graham Eady coaches in the reserve grade at that time at Seagulls. I think we made the semi-finals. So
beautiful.
But I don't think it wasn't a great commute in terms that wasn't a great year for me football-wise at that period.
Okay, so let's roll on a little bit now and let's talk about Game 3. Now, you've told me that there was no curfew, but, if you look online, if you search, far and wide, and if you look far enough, it will say here and there that there was a curfew on the team. Everyone was told to stay inside. Now, I know that you're adamant that there was no curfew put on the side, and your wife was pregnant in hospital at the time. So take us through this whole thing.
Yeah, well, at the time, I think from a recall, my wife at the time, she was pregnant and having some difficulties, and then so obviously we mustered at the hotel there in Sydney and went to the team meeting, had that, and then everyone went their way, which whether that was to have dinner or do whatever they
Yep.
want. So I said, well, I'm just going to just go home and check on things at home, and then come back the next morning for training. But then, obviously, the next when I logged up at training, I've got the punt. So it wasn't good news to go back to. That's for sure.
And then if you compare that to some of the stories you hear over the years, some very recent and some a little bit further back, about some of the Blues bonding sessions and camps and whatnot, do you feel hard done by it?
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, certainly I do. Yeah, I don't think it was fair at the time. Like certainly wasn't as if I was out on the drink all night, and don't hold that. Like we would bond as a team and stuff like that. But this was a different situation, and and it wasn't if I was not a good bloke, I was a good team man, and but just the circumstances I went home to. For the reasons I mentioned, and I remember speaking to Brian Niebling, who was a great Queensland player at the time, and
Yep.
afterwards, and he was saying, mate, they would never have done that to a Queenslander. You know what I mean? And in that period, apart from the most recent times when Queensland won, how many they win 10 straight before
Yep.
we've started winning again. That period in the 80s, Queensland were a strong side with Mal and Wally and Gene Miles and Brian Niebling. They won plenty on the trot as well, and their camaraderie was very strong too, and they stuck with their side for a long time as well. So, that's what he said. They wouldn't have done that to a Queenslander. So New South Wales stopped. They changed their sides a lot through that period, and
Yeah.
he was another example of them. Not being solid with blokes. And listening and having a bit, understanding what's going on.
Mm. And I guess that comes from years and years of those interstate games. Back through the back from 1908, where the best Queensland players, because they played in Sydney, they had to pull on the Blues jersey. And then all of a sudden, 1980 comes around, and they get to go home and represent their own state. It probably helped them a little bit too that their core group, I guess they couldn't pick too far outside of maybe 20, 25 players. But for the Blues, I guess that hurt as well when you had such a big Sydney competition. Were you always looking over your shoulder? Did you ever feel comfortable in that rep side, or even the Australian sides, or how did you feel in rep sides in general when you went into camp?
Yeah, no, of course. It was pretty. I was certainly wasn't of a Shane Webke ilk or whatever like that. So if I got played for play for Australia, it was a great honour, no doubt about it. And every game, it could be a last game. You know what I mean? So you got to cherish every chance you get. And even when you're playing first grade, every time you pull on that jumper and you're playing first grade, geez, there's plenty of great players who have played before you in that jersey, and plenty of great players who, due to injury or bad luck, haven't been able to get there, and they'd give their right arm to be able to do it. So you got to, you really do have to, accept and be very grateful when you pull on the Blues jersey or the Reds and the Maroons jersey, and obviously an Australian jersey, and you've got to cherish that. So. No, certainly. I think in that period in the 80s, New South Wales did chop and change their sides a lot, and certainly a lot more than Queensland did.
Did you notice that too? So when did you end up moving up to the Gold Coast post career? How soon was it after you retired? Because I know you went back to Manly in '92, didn't you?
Yeah, I did, and I hurt my shoulder, and anyway, that was kind of the end of my career after that. But I actually ended up after finishing playing. I went up to Gladstone, which is up in central Queensland, in a hotel up there, and ran the pub up there, and for a number of years, and then came back and settled back on the Gold Coast then, mate. So probably around the mid '90s, yeah.
Okay, so let's take you back. We'll stay on the origin. Origin line here. Now, you were also part in August of '87, so we'll go back 12 months, and you were part of another amazing event, which probably doesn't get as much airtime as some other stories out there, because I guess it was a bit of shits and gigs kind of thing as well. But the 1987 State of Origin, the fourth Origin in Long Beach, California. And I've done a bit of research for this one, and one of the first things I saw was the Queensland and Blues teams getting off, I think it was LAX, and every single one of you had a Kubras on. Had you ever wanted a Kubra? Like, what was the go there? Was it a bit of marketing when you get off the plane, or?
Yeah, I think it certainly was. It was a bit of marketing, and I think, for a lot of us blokes who grew up in the city. I'd never know how to put one on. So fortunately, Noel Crusher was in the squad. So I think Crusher was giving everybody instructions on how to put it on your head and make sure it fitted correctly. So yeah, it was interesting. The Queenslanders on that flight, I think they're all on the beers and having a good
Yes.
time. And then for us, we needed to kind of use it as a square the series situation. So we were all pretty well. Stayed off the drink and took it a little bit more serious than the Queenslanders. But down Los Angeles, I don't think it was an interesting trip, that's for sure.
And were you guys on the same flight as the Maroons?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we were. Yeah, I think we were going over. Yes, we were going over. Yeah. I think coming home we probably were too.
Yeah, did you mingle? Because you would have had a couple of teammates in the Queensland side. Did you guys mingle on the plane, or was it just kind of stick to yourselves?
No, I think we'll stick to ourselves. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. No, we didn't. No, they must have. We were separated. That's right. We weren't sitting with each other. That's for sure.
And some of the stories that came out of that trip, particularly post match, I understand there was a fair bit of fun had afterwards. And as you mentioned, the Blues were pretty serious about getting that win after dropping the series back in Australia. But unfortunately, you broke your jaw during the game. So what happened there? Did you fly straight back, or did you hang around?
No, unfortunately, I ended up getting a couple one and cracked my jaw, and fortunately, it wasn't a full separation, so I didn't have to get it wide. But at that stage, that was in 1987. Manly were going really well.
Yes, yep.
At that period of time, and we're on track to make the semis and things like that. So I think I had to wear like a head brace sort of thing to hold my jaw in place for about 5 weeks. We didn't get wide because and then fortunately I kept training and eating plenty and I threw a straw in a blender, but tried to keep the weight on myself and fortunately Bob Fulton picked me. He'd seen me training, knew what sort of bloke I was, and picked me to play the major semi-final against the Roosters at the cricket ground, which straight in at the time, I think there's a lot of press about me being the weak link in the side, and fortunately, I lasted the game and had a pretty strong game, so that was very pleasing, and I appreciate Bo's always having confidence in me for that.
And where do you rank that individual for yourself? Where do you rank that amongst the best games that you've played in your career? Where that semi-final against the Roosters, coming back from what you came back from.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I am. Looking back on your career, it was probably a good one. And I remember the Roosters kicked off, and the thing was always to I was going to take the first hit up of the game just to get into it straight away. Yeah, so they kicked it deep, and I can't remember who caught it. And they passed it to me, and I took the ball up, and I remember copping one across the chops, and quite a few actually on that first tackle, and then I thought to myself, well, wow, hang on, I'm all right here. There's nothing wrong. I'm sweet. And then away I went, and I was very, very, very happy with to get through that game and prove to a lot of people that I could do it, and thank Bose for giving me the chance to come straight back into that side, and we won that and we went straight into the grand final. So it was a massive thing. It was.
Last week in episode 1. Shane Webke was at length. He spoke about Wayne Bennett and what kind of bloke he was and the mayor manager he was, and he only had to say a few words to get the best out of players. Run us through what it was like being coached, and you've already said how great a coach Bob Fulton was. What was he like as a one-on-one mayor manager? Run us through what it was like to be coached by Bob.
Yeah, like I always remember, Bob Fulton, obviously when he came to Manly, he brought a lot of professionalism into the club, and when he looked at the juniors, and I was only a junior when he first came to the club, so I came through as him being the head coach, and he gave me an opportunity. And probably the biggest thing Bob Fulton did for me, as an 18, 19-year-old when I come out of school and was playing the Jersey Flegg at that time, he sent me over to George Daldry, who was the doyen of conditioners, and George was based at the City Tattersalls Club, and if your listeners want to listen to a story about George Daldry, he's a very interesting man. He was a prisoner of war in Changi, and and then he came through and became a professional trainer and trained a lot of the Australian rugby league teams, Olympic teams, and mate, he was just a legend, George. And George taught me about mental toughness and about how to train, and conditioning and things like that. And that was through Bob Fulton and put me on a track to learn a lot of things. And then, as I said, Bose would, you know, he knew he just wouldn't blanket coach everybody. He knew what each personality was and how to get the best out of different guys. And that wasn't just for me. That was with Crusher and Fatty and Michael O'Connor. And we had a side in the 80s and 87 when we won the premiership. Like we had a side full of international players, and you had to get everyone pulling the right way. And that was his greatest ability for sure.
You talk about conditioning too, and I look at some photos of you in your playing career, Phil, and I'm trying to word this the right way, and I did mention I have a fiance, so I'm just going to say, how I'm going to say this. Your body shape, Phil, you didn't look like some of the other front rowers that were playing at the time. You had this physique, and the Marty Bellas and these other blokes in the game, obviously at that time through the 80s, you didn't necessarily, not all the players look like they do, today in 2020.
Yes.
How much was it pure talent for you, and how much was it training and getting ready for games and looking after yourself during the week?
Yeah, that's right. You're right there, Curtis. Like certainly wasn't the most gifted of players, but I was.
I'm not saying that. But I'm saying
Yeah.
what percentage was it that you got yourself ready for games? Like, because it looked like you looked after your body a bit better than some of the other front rowers playing at the time.
Well, I was keen to, training was a big part of it. And you go back to Bob Fulton once again, like he was the best in his period of time as a player. He was ahead of the game in being a conditioner and the fitness of it all. And having George there teach me at a young age, I took a lot of pride and I trained all the time. I probably, even though in those days you probably trained as a team, 3 times a week or whatever like that as a club. But, in that period also in the early 80s, mid 80s when I came through, Des Hasler, that's when he came to Manly. And Des was, he set the standard for everybody. He was doing plyometrics before even people knew what they were, and that body weight stuff. And Des was just amazing as an athlete and a trainer. But the lessons I've learnt through George and Bose, I trained certainly more than just what the club did. But in those in the mid '80s, some blokes trained a lot, only the club trainer. But you got to do the extras. That's what it's all about.
Right, and if you look at the St. George Dragons, I don't know if you how much you know about obviously you know about the Dragons, but I've got a couple of their books here, and a lot of it they talk about repetition and training harder than everybody else. So yes, you can have the best team in all the land, but if you don't apply yourself and train harder than everybody else, someone will catch up and someone will beat you on Sunday.
Oh, for sure. And it's a big mental thing, isn't it? As an individual, like you've got not only when I played, like it was important that you got over your opposition player, and football's a simple game. If every time your team gets over the top of his opposition player and plays better, well, you'll win the game on the day. And so if you take it as a personal battle and be mentally tough, and that's what it's about, well, that puts you in good stead, that's for sure.
Now, you just mentioned Des Hasler. You also played with Cliff Lyons. Now, work this one out for me, Phil. Hasler, who you said is one of the fittest blokes in the world, he retires in 97. I think he actually played in 97 at the Magpies to finish his career. Cliffy played to 1999 in about his 13th comeback. And how many smokes would Cliffy get through on game day?
Yeah, he was unbelievable.
That's crazy.
Wasn't he? He was terrific, Cliffy. What a great player. And when he played at Manly, he'd already played quite a number of years at North Sydney.
Yes.
And I think he came from Gundagai originally when he started his career. And so he wasn't a really young bloke when he came to Manly. But, gee, what a great football for a long time. I think he played with me in the 80s. And then he kept going there and he put, him and Stephen Menzies later in the 90s were just unbelievable, weren't they? They were just terrific. And, Cliffy, he's a one-off, isn't he? He did. You had Des, who was way ahead in terms of his training and what he ate and drank and everything like that. And Cliff, he didn't mind a bunger and a beer, that's for sure.
I just don't know how some people do it. Like I'm 33 and I already look 85, and I reckon Cliffy could still run rings around me, mate. So some people have just got it. I don't know.
Yeah, he was terrific. He was a great player, wasn't he? Wonderful, for sure.
Absolutely. And you talk about Manly too, and we'll talk about this grand final, 1987 at the SCG. Could you feel? I guess it's a bit difficult because the social media and everything now. Canberra made the grand final last year. Some say they're a smaller club, so what was going to be the interest in the game? Raiders versus the Roosters, another team with, if you could say, a smaller fan base. What was it like in a grand final week in the 80s when you didn't have social media? So I guess you might have a random radio interview or the local rag. I think it's the Manly Mirror. Is it the Mirror over there?
Manly Daily.
Daily.
Yeah,
Manly Daily.
Manly Daily.
So what was it like on a grand final week back in the 80s compared to now?
Yeah, there was, it was still, there's still plenty of press about it. You think like rugby league was a premier team. There was no real AFL. The Swans were there, but they weren't big.
Yep.
AFL hadn't made the impact. So rugby league was still the main game in town, and to make the grand final, certainly the local paper and the television and that, they'd be doing the interviews and things like that at the time. So there was still a buzz and for us, and certainly in terms of on the grand final day, it was full house at the SCG. It was the last grand final at the cricket ground at that time. I think they played one last year, didn't they, or whatever. But this was for a long time, and they there mightn't have been. There was a lot of Manly supporters, but everyone's second team is against whoever's plays against Manly. That's so everyone hates Manly. So it was it was certainly a good atmosphere, that's for sure.
Now, back in the 80s, and another hardhead that played for Manly, I think he played back in the 50s. He might even play with your old band. Did you have much to do with the Moose? Rex Mossop?
Yeah, old Rexy Mossop. Yeah, Rex. Yeah, I didn't have a lot to do with him, but he did play with my dad in the 1950s. That's right, he did. And he was. I think Rex was still probably one of the main media guys still in that period too, wasn't he?
Yeah,
he
absolutely.
was Rex. And he was certainly a Manly man, old Rex.
And speaking of your dad as well, we've done that beautifully, Phil. That's called a segue, mate. We rolled right into the next passage. We're doing this beautifully. Doug Daley, he's another legend of the Manly club. Now, he retired before you were born. So what you remember of your father, I guess you would have been a little, 5, 6 year old when he started as treasurer at Brookvale at Manly?
Yeah.
Or secretary?
He was treasurer, at the time. So, and all of those days they were on honorary positions. So, Dad came down from Austinville up in northern New South Wales, and he came down with the Commonwealth Bank, worked there, and then he was a footballer at Manly. Ken Arthurson actually coached him. Ken was the first grade coach in the 50s at Manly, and Dad, when he retired, carried on as committeeman, became a treasurer there for a long, long time, and then became CEO because due to circumstances, I think a few guys, unfortunately, Johnny Tennyson passed away, and Dad stepped into the breach there, and he was a Manly. He loved Manly, and Dad, it was his life for a long, long time as a player, and then as a committeeman, and certainly, my dad was my idol, and to play first grade, I wanted to play first grade just like my dad did, and then to make the grand final, and Dad was the CEO.
Amazing.
At that time, it was a wonderful thing. Yeah, it was a wonderful thing.
And was he still the CEO when you departed for the Seagulls?
Yeah, he was. Dad was at that time, and but then I came back another year at Manly. As I said, I hurt my shoulder a couple of years up there, and but circumstances were at the time. It was probably I probably needed a bit of a change from the club, even though I was a Manly junior, and came up here and played for the Seagulls. Probably wasn't a great rugby league career move, but things happen in life, and I wouldn't be here living on the Gold Coast now if I hadn't made that move then.
Exactly, and let's go back to '84 then, and we'll stay with Manly. Off the bench, it's your first taste of first grade in Wollongong, and you guys went down 18-14. I don't know if you remember the score from that one, Phil, but 18-14 against the Steelers. But your first run-on game comes in round 2, 1985, at Lidcombe against the Magpies. 85s, at Lidcombe, and you guys got up 30-10. So, and am I right in saying that you started number 24?
Mate, I can't remember, to be honest. I don't know. I don't know. They might have called the program early or whatever. I think that was I don't know. Remember my number. I think someone got injured or someone pulled out, so I got a start. That's right. So, but I do remember the first. I think it was a punch up in the scrum actually to be
lovely
in those days, and I must have went all right because I think after that I got picked again the next week, so that was good. But it would have been a good win at Lidcombe. I can't remember the details too much, but geez, dirty old Lidcombe Oval would have been a good win over there.
Yeah, and because the Magpies were off to Campbelltown in '86, so
Yeah.
What do you remember so did you know at the start of that week that you were debuting?
Geez,
Like
I
as
don't.
you start?
Yeah, I can't remember. I think maybe Paul McCabe might have got injured and he pulled out. But
All right, so we'll jump ahead a little bit here, Phil. Too. Well, I guess we're not jumping too far ahead. And this is what amazes me about your career, Phil, and how quickly everything happened. Because you played. I understand you played New South Wales junior reps. Is that right?
yeah, I did. Yeah, under 18s. Yeah, yeah, New South Wales and Australian under 18s. That's right. Yep.
Australia 18s as well. So
Yep.
you were obviously destined to go into first grade. But for me, like you made your run on debut in '85, and by
Yep.
'86 you're on the Kangaroo Tour to Europe. Did that all
Yeah.
just kind of come to you, or was it kind of like, okay, well, I'm playing good football, it's expected. I should make these these rep teams because
No, no, it wasn't. But I think in 85, 86, I think, or 86, whatever, there was like a city country games and things like that. So you kind of, yeah, you played in those games. And obviously the Manly side was going good as well, which obviously helped selection. And yeah, but you're right. I think to get picked for Australia, yeah, it was a great, great honour, obviously. And the Kangaroo Tour was, a great thing to go on. It wasn't. I think the squad was a little bit bigger than what they take now, but still, to go be selected on the tour, yeah, it's a
mm.
great honour.
and they were well, you guys were called the Unbeatables. So you guys went through and you just destroyed everything in front of you.
Yeah, we're fortunate. In '82, the side went through. Max Krilich was the captain then. In '82,
Yep.
I think Frank Stanton was the coach, and then in '86 we went to Donny Ferner was our coach then, and Wally Lewis was our captain. Peter Sterling was the vice captain, and yeah, we went through and we played a lot of midweek games too in those days, which was great. And that squad was so strong that Mal Meninga couldn't even make the run on side, so that
Yeah.
gives you an indication on how good a team it was.
And you played 7 games for the Kangaroos on that tour. Your first one was against Cumbria in front of a tick under 5,000 people. I can't imagine how cold it was. I suppose it was October, so it wouldn't have been too bad at that point. But yeah, a big win, 48-12. So can you remember that one?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, yeah, I do remember that game running on there. It was cold though,
Yeah.
and it was a good win. And then obviously played a few of the test matches, and obviously I didn't play any test matches, but the club games to the different teams like your Wigan and St Helens, and rugby league was massive over in those days, and that they certainly loved Mal in St Helens because he'd been there
Yep.
before and playing there, and I remember Sterlo would. He was going to Leeds the following year, I think, so they were all keen to see him run around as well for sure.
And take us through a Kangaroo Tour because it's not one and done in a week or two. This goes for a fair whack of time. How long were you guys away on tour for?
Yeah, I think we went about 8 weeks, but in the
Yeah.
old days, in the old days, they used to catch the boat over
Yeah,
there.
they're gone for months.
I know, it's incredible, So but we stayed at the Dragonara Hotel in Leeds, which was good, and we had a couple of floors there where a floor where all the players stayed, and I roomed with Steve Roach for the period of time, so that was interesting. Big blocker, and like next door to me was Les Davidson and Brian Niebling, and yeah, so you made some good friendships over there, that's for sure. When you go on a tour like that, everyone, even though you're whacking each other during the season and that, but when you go on a tour like that, you get to know the guys a lot better, and everyone had a great time, that's for sure.
And is it similar at all to cricket where the fast bowlers stick together in cricket? Do the front rowers kind of make their own club on a tour like that, or do you just mingle with whoever can drink and whoever's a good fella?
Yeah, I think, yeah, well, that's right. You do, yeah, you mix with good fellas, and and if the backs, some of the little backs were all right, we'd let them come into the forwards group if they could drink. But certainly, you're looking at blokes like Terry Lamb, well, you wouldn't classify him as a shrinking bowler, even though he played in the backs at that stage, there's and Mal, of course. Mal was in the centres in those. Well, he played in the centres, didn't he? So
Yeah.
he certainly wasn't a small back, was he?
No, well, I know what you mean though, because if you look at, I guess everyone remembers Mal, 94, the grand final, the Kangaroo Tour in 94, where he led the side over to Europe for the final Kangaroo Tour as we knew them. And I guess everyone remembers Big Mal with the guard on his arm and all that, but he was still a unit, back in the 80s, but he was about half the size what he was, at the back end of his career, but he was still huge.
Oh yeah, he's a big, strong guy, wasn't he? And I think, we'll see. Didn't Mal went on about 4 Kangaroo Tours, didn't he? I
Yep.
think he probably holds the record for Kangaroo Tours, and what a great player he has. And he's been wonderful. He's a coach in Australia now. What a great rugby league man Mal Meninga's been.
Well,
Truly is.
I'd like to get some tips off him because from what I understand, I think he had I don't know what number he's up to, but I think he had another baby last year.
Did he?
Yeah, I think so. Last year or the year before. So whatever he's got, I want some of that.
he's a great rugby league man, and the great thing about Mal, he's despite him being such a superstar, he still treats everybody the same and speaks to everybody. He's a good fella.
And I've been in a few rooms, functions and whatnot, and I've noticed some footy players when they walk into a room, there's an aura about them, and kind of the mood changes, and everyone's like, oh, there's Wally or there's Mal. Mal Meninga had that in spades, and he still does. He's just got this aura about him. What was it like?
Oh, no doubt.
What was it like playing with him, and especially being on a tour and being around someone like Mal Meninga?
Oh, it's just great. That's right. I was only a young bloke at the time. A lot of the guys, Greg Alexander was on that tour as well. He's only a young bloke, and even though Mal had been on tours before, he always looked out for everybody, and he's a real personable sort of fella, and that's why he was a successful player, and that's why he's a successful coach for Australia, because he understands blokes, and he's a decent man.
Let's go back to Manly quickly. You played at a great time to be a Manly supporter through the 80s, obviously, but there was a changing of the guard when that 87 side, I guess, compared to the Manly side at the start of that decade. Who was the guy? Who was the best player you played with at Manly?
Yeah, we used to talk about that side in the 80s. There's some great players, weren't there? Des was wonderful. Cliffy and the forward pack. Mal Cochran was our hooker there, and in the grand final, Kevin Ward, the great English front rower, played with me in the front row, and he was just terrific, Kevin. And Ronnie Gibbs was in the second row with Crusher, Noel Cleland, Fatty Vaughton was the lock. So there was some good guys in there, and and some talent. And obviously in the centres, Michael O'Connor was there. We brought him over from St George, the dual international, and he was a terrific player too, wasn't he?
Absolutely. And you talk about English front rowers as well, and some of the I sound like 100-year-old here, but some of the younger listeners out there who might be listening to Top of the Props out there on their on the train or whatever with their headphones in, the front rowers from back in from England in the 50s, 60s, 70s, they played a different game to front rowers in Australia, didn't they? And I guess that for a long time, the British sides that came over, they had a lot more skill than the Australian front rowers. So I want to ask you, I will get to a question here somewhere, Phil. The question, I guess, growing up for you, were you a student of the game? Did you have, idols or heroes that you saw or front rowers that you said, I want to be like him or...
Oh, of course. I think as a boy growing up in Manly, and I think probably in that era, everyone looked towards Terry Randall. He's a local junior at Manly, and Igor, as he was his nickname, mate. He's just a wonderful player for Manly in the 70s till he retired, and he was a tough as nails fella, and he's a second row, played a little bit of front row, but more second row. And I think he was probably every young bloke's who wanted to play in the forwards, one of his toughest, Terry Randall. So he was just a great player, Terry. And then, but obviously Manly has some great front rowers when they won the premierships in the 70s. Big Billy Hamilton, and then they brought John O'Neill over from South Sydney. Ken brought him over. So I think they were the front rowers at Manly when they won their first premiership.
What do you think of Manly these days, Phil? Do you follow them closely, or do you just generally watch the game as a whole, or do you still keep an interest in what's happening at the Seagulls?
Yeah, I still obviously do watch Manly and keep an interest. They still named the award, the Clubman of the Year award, after my dad, the Doug Daley Clubman of the Year, which is really nice of them to do that. And obviously with Desi coming back there, and I thought Tubes did a wonderful job there, a few years ago when he was there, and but it's great to have Des back, the Manly guy, back running the club, and he's got them going the right way. And there's some good local juniors in there, obviously. The Trebojevic boys, they're wonderful, are they? They're just fantastic.
There's a third one too, apparently.
Yes, another great brother. So that's wonderful, and I think his dad was a Narrabeen Sharks player. So the family's been on the peninsula for a long time.
You just mentioned twos. I was going to let you go then, Phil, but you mentioned Jeff Tuvey. Did you play in that tour game against the Brits when you guys got up at Brookvale?
I didn't. That was two. Actually, was in the Australian side
Oh,
in the AA.
well, there you
And
go. That's a good reason not to play for Manly.
yes, I didn't play that night. And that was I think that was Tu's debut, wasn't it, at
Hmm.
Brookvale Oval? And but mate, people say who's the toughest player you've seen. Well, mate, Jeff Tuvey, you'd have to be. He'd be front and centre. Geez, he was a great player too. Tough, and I remember when he first came to Manly, had the choir boy looks and a little bloke, but gee whiz, what a great player he was for Manly.
All right, Phil, I do appreciate your patience, and particularly we'll fix this up later with the computer went haywire a little bit before, but I do appreciate your patience. Before I let you go, I just want to ask you a question. How would you like your teammates to look back on you as a teammate? What would you like them to say when someone says, what was it like playing with Phil Daley?
Oh, that's a good question. Oh, mate, I just think I was, an honest guy, put in the effort, and I wouldn't let my teammates down, and have a go the whole time, mate. Yeah, I wouldn't give up.
Good on you, Phil. You're an absolute gentleman, and I do appreciate your time, mate. And we'll get you back on. There's plenty more to talk about. But once again, Phil Daley, thank you very much for being our second guest on Top of the Props.
Thanks a lot, Curtis. It's been a great honour. Thanks,
Thanks,
you.
mate. I'll talk to you again soon. Cheers, Phil.
See you, Curtis. Bye, mate.